The air inside the lower sub-basement of the abandoned Oakridge Sanatorium measured 41 degrees Fahrenheit at 3:14 a.m., smelling heavily of damp concrete and oxidized copper, while the beam of my halogen torch cut through a thick, suspended static of fine drywall dust. I stepped carefully over the threshold of level C, listening to the hollow reverberation of my own boots against the damp linoleum. On a rusted steel admissions desk near the entry, a heavy ceramic mug sat abandoned, its interior stained with the hardened, cracked residue of black coffee, next to a wax candle that had burned completely down to a frozen puddle over an open ledger. Someone left quickly. I unfolded a restricted county blueprint I secured from the municipal archives, running my thumb over the faded blue grid lines. The official schematic clearly dictated that this entire lower ward was sealed off and filled with solid industrial concrete decades ago, which made me stop and listen to the silence of the room. But as I held the paper in the gloom and looked up, angling the light forward, there was no concrete barrier. Just a cavernous, pitch-black void extending deep into the foundation, completely unarchived and untouched, leading directly toward an area designated only as Cell 114. What exerted enough physical force from inside a sealed isolation cell to warp 4-inch cast iron, and why did the staff abandon their posts in the middle of the night? I walked silently down that undocumented black corridor, the stillness pressing against my eardrums with a physical weight, until the beam of the flashlight finally struck the cold, massive face of the heavy cast iron door. I pulled the folded photocopy of the uncatalogued county police microfilm from my interior jacket pocket, holding it carefully under the narrow, stark rim of the halogen light. The sheriff's log, stamped precisely November 3, 1978, outlined a series of unauthorized structural modifications ordered specifically for a subject identified only as Patient 409. The clinical, sterile detachment of the typed report detailed an emergency requisition for high-tensile architectural reinforcements and heavy acoustic dampening. The local authorities noted a pattern of severe physical anomalies, stating plainly that standard medical restraints had repeatedly failed to mitigate the subject's nocturnal movements. Looking down the length of this unarchived corridor, the isolation was absolute. There was no ambient light, no distant sound of traffic, nothing but the hollow chill of a forgotten room that the official blueprints claimed did not exist. It is a profoundly isolating experience to stand inside a physical space that history actively tried to erase. I lowered the document and swept the light across the damp floor directly beneath the heavy frame of the cell. Lying discarded near a structural support pillar was a portable, handheld cassette dictation recorder. The thick plastic casing was heavily fractured, and a tangled mass of brown magnetic tape spilled out from the shattered spools. The rigid red record button remained firmly depressed, permanently jammed down into the cracked housing. The device was not set down. It was dropped by someone scrambling rapidly backward, a nurse or an orderly who chose to flee the corridor rather than preserve whatever horrific audio they were initially trying to capture. I stepped closer to examine the primary barricade designed to hold Patient 409. The door was an archaic, windowless slab of solid cast iron, completely anomalous for a psychiatric ward, secured externally by 6 independent heavy steel deadbolts anchored directly into the surrounding concrete masonry. But as I traced my gloved hand along the freezing, rough surface of the 4-inch thick barrier, the structural alignment felt impossibly wrong. The dead center of the massive iron plate bulged noticeably outward toward the hallway, severely marred by a cluster of deep, parallel grooves violently gouged into the hardened material. A localized force mimicking immense hydraulic pressure had acted against the interior face of a cell meant to hold a single human being, dragging downward against the unyielding barricade with impossible, silent strength. The metal warped. I extracted a sterile sample of the dark particulate matter crusted deep inside those parallel gouges, securing it inside a small glass vial. Holding the glass directly under the harsh beam of my flashlight, it became painfully clear that the heavy residue crushed into the cast iron was entirely organic mass. The jagged fragments were unmistakably dense pieces of shattered bone calcium, bound tightly with thick layers of dried epidermal tissue. Whatever was locked inside possessed immense, desperate biological strength, dragging its own physical anatomy against the unyielding barrier until the bone splintered. I opened the final recovered duty ledger, bringing the fragile pages directly under the stark circle of the light. The last handwritten entry was scrawled across the bottom margin at exactly 4:02 a.m., the blue ink bleeding into the damp paper. It stated plainly that the bolts were holding, but the sound had stopped. That abrupt, suffocating quiet prompted the remaining staff to lock down the ward and leave the hallway lights burning indefinitely. We are left to wonder if the anomaly trapped inside that cell finally succumbed to its blunt force injuries, or if it found an unseen subterranean route out of the dark. If you prefer examining these quiet, unverified records away from the noise of the modern internet, ensure you are subscribed to the archive. We close the physical file on Ward C tonight. The bolts held long enough for them to walk away. Until the next anomaly requires our attention, keep your desk lamp burning. I'll see you in the next archive.